I have an undrafted series I've announced, and then the NBA Experience series. And so it's an absolute honor to have you on. So thank you for coming on.
Max, my pleasure. Looking forward to talking to you.
Now, it's interesting with the NBA. So I've covered the NBA for now 3 seasons, specifically the Orlando Magic. And one thing I've absolutely loved about covering it that you don't see on TV is how many things that go and get involved into giving that final product that you see on the screen. So the fans at home watching it, they have no idea how many things have to take place in order for you to watch that one game on TV. So let's rewind the clocks back a little bit. So I'm 3 seasons deep. You've had tons of experience. You've covered so many games. How did you get started covering the NBA?
Well, I've done basketball pretty much my whole life, a lot of baseball too. And as far as the NBA goes, I got to predate it just a bit. I grew up in North Carolina. And when I was a little guy coming up, we had a thing called the ABA, the American Basketball Association. It was a rival to the NBA back in the 60s and 70s. And when I was in high school and while I first started going to college, we had our team of our own, the Carolina Cougars. And I covered them pretty much every night from my little radio station. And that was really my first foray into professional basketball. And the ABA was a great league. It forced a merger with the NBA in 1976, and that's where the Indiana Pacers and San Antonio Spurs and Denver Nuggets and those guys, the Nets, came from. They joined the NBA. The ABA was down to 7 teams. 4 of them made it. The Cougars moved to St. Louis, and then they were disbanded. But that was my first introduction into pro basketball. And then when I moved to Virginia, I started doing NBA games, filling in at a regional cable now known as Masson. It was Home Team Sports back then. And I would do Bullets games. Now they're called the Wizards. And I would fill in. And so my first play-by-play was in the mid-'80s with the NBA. And then I came to Atlanta full-time with the Hawks in 1996.
Wow. Now, you're a legend in the business. So you're well established. Everyone knows your voice. You're just what you've been able to do for the NBA has been incredible. I'm a huge fan of your career. Now, I'm just starting, but I've gotten this a couple times. I can't imagine how many times you've gotten this. Did you know right away you had the voice? Like you had a distinct voice for people. Like I could hear that on radio. I could hear that on TV. Like, did you know right away your voice separated yourself amongst others?
No, sir, I did not. It was sort of a learned experience for me. Okay. Remember, if you know the backstory, I broadcast a half an inning of a baseball game when I was 12, and that's how I got my foot in the door. It's just a lark that I, got a chance to do that. But my voice was a little higher then, so I had to sort of grow into this.
Right.
One of the best things that ever happened to me was I worked full time and I went to college full time, and I was a speech major in college in my hometown of Salisbury, North Carolina, Catawba College. And being a speech major was fantastic for me. The head of the department, a gentleman by the name of Carl Hales, basically taught me himself. Now, I had to take a bunch of classes, but I also took a lot of independent studies with Carl that worked on voice and diction and speech and projection and getting on stage and doing all those things. And I never really, growing up, felt like I had a great voice.
Wow.
I just never felt it because of, you're not a prophet in your hometown kind of thing. And I really didn't think my voice had a lot of timbre until I got to my first, quote unquote, big job in Norfolk, Virginia. And I was doing William and Mary football. And this is in the fall of 1978. And back then, 1,000 years ago, it was a little different in recording games. So I had to set up a tape recorder with a timer and a microphone next to a radio. So I would leave and go do the game, and hopefully this thing would record the game while I was gone, and I listened to it back when I got home. The proverbial air check, if you will. And I popped it in. I remember This is a little cassette tape recorder. And I remember popping it in and listening to my own voice after, being exposed here in Virginia. And I was like, that doesn't sound half bad. So I think that was really the first point where I felt like my voice really had a little bit of timbre to it.
Right.
I never, and still don't. I mean, I don't, people tell me that and I'm overwhelmed. Everybody says, oh, the voice, but
Yeah.
It took me a while to grow into it, I must say.
That's interesting. So I've been on local radio. I'm in the early stages of the journey. So done local radio, covered the Orlando Magic, like I said, and then obviously my podcast. And when I first started doing radio, I've done it now for over 3 years, over about 1,030 segments. I track the days. And when I first started, I couldn't stand how I sounded. And I was told, don't focus on like the sound of your voice, just focus on your delivery and whatnot. And it's just over time, I think I've got accustomed to my voice, and it's something that I try not to focus on too much. But people such as yourself, I always pick your brain on those type of things, especially with radio and TV and being an announcer. And you do have an amazing voice, a very distinct voice. But one thing I've also noticed covering the Orlando Magic is how important the announcer is. The play-by-play people, the announcer. It could really, like, for example, the Orlando Magic have been, it's no secret, they've struggled for quite a while now, and they're trying to find a direction. They're trying to find excitement. Even though we have a very young team, it's kind of hard to rally people to be excited about a team that's from one of the bottom of the league, but somehow they do it. The announcer does an amazing job. They get people amped up, even for one of the teams that could barely win a game. And I feel like an announcer truly is the life of the arena, is the life of the team. It's like the bridge between the fans and the players. For the Atlanta Hawks, has anything changed for you in the dynamic of your approach to your business and what you do? Because now you guys have a very exciting team. Trey Young is one of the brightest young stars. So does that make your job easier to get these people ramped up and excited to watch Atlanta Hawks play?
I think winning probably does it more than anything. People want to be associated with a winner. They want to follow a winner. If you're a lifelong Hawks fan or Magic fan, you want your team to do well. And so with that, there's a natural enthusiasm that you bring. But there's no question. I mean, David Steele, whom you should have on your program.
I would love to.
And Paul Kennedy is right there in Orlando. These guys have been through it all. They've had the best of times and the worst of times. And I think it really comes down to, Max, being a professional broadcaster. We can't control the team's fortune. They're going to win or they're going to lose. We can't do anything about that. But what we can do something about is putting everything that we have, our heart and soul, into that broadcast. And I think if you do that, and that's not just the announcing, but that's the producer, director, the guys in tape, audio, right down the line, that we do everything we can to have a 3-hour NBA presentation, like in your case, Bally Sun and Bally Southeast here, that we don't cheat the viewers. The thing about television, they can see the game. They see the same game we see. I mean, if the Magic stink that night, they can see it just as well as anybody else. But I think that it's not like you're trying to fool anybody with false enthusiasm, but you're trying to make a presentation for 3 hours that serves the stakeholders, which are your audience, your sponsors, the ball club, and so that everything is served in that 3-hour time window.
Right. Now, I understand the NFL is the most watched sport, and I could be saying this because I'm a little bit biased, but the NBA is clearly the most talked about sport, whether it's free agents, it's the brand, it's the players themselves. Obviously, they're not wearing helmets, so you can put a name to a face a lot more. It's easier. The NFL is really about the shield. There's no player bigger than the shield and the brand. The NBA is more player empowerment. So the NBA is just more talked about. But doesn't it feel like just a little bit more magical? I feel like these players feel like superheroes, the narratives, the stories. When you're seeing Giannis go against the Boston Celtics, two emerging stars, it just feels like a story. So when you're doing these announcements, does it feel like you're telling a story for the viewers just watching?
Totally. And And it is the intimacy of basketball. We're the only sport that has fans sitting next to the court. You know,
Yeah.
we're the only sport that you can see the guys. They're not wearing helmets and face guards and all that. They're right out there in their uniforms and right in front of us. So there's an intimacy to basketball that the other sports just don't have. Football, uh, baseball, hockey. The fans are detached from the action, whereas in the NBA they're right on top of it. So that's a major difference. So yeah, I would say so. It's much more of an excitable game from a fan standpoint. And I think that's why it's probably, well, it is. It's second only to soccer in the world in terms of its fan appeal. So yeah, I mean, you feel a much closer relationship with the players because you can touch them. You
Yeah.
can see them. They're right there in front of you. And, if the ball goes into the stands, they might be sitting in your lap at some point. So no other sport can you do that in. So, yes, to answer your question.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up as far as a global sport. I mean, now we've seen Jokic back-to-back MVPs. We've seen Giannis win back-to-back MVPs. Luka Doncic may be the best player in the world. Like, it's just become such a global game. From when you started covering the NBA to now, are you a fan of the direction that it's headed in? Obviously, being a global game is fantastic, but just the way the game is played, when you get more overseas players, they tend to play a different version of basketball, but it feels like it's all immersed and evolved into one style where it's run and gun. It's a lot of threes. It's very skilled positions. I mean, Jokic is a center who I've said, I mean, no disrespect to the older players. Hakeem Olajuwon probably is the player that comes to mind. But as far as like the most skilled center, I'm not saying the best center of all time, but Jokic is a guy who is arguably the best passer in the league at the center position. He can shoot a three. He can post up. Like nowadays, 1 through 5, you have to be able to do a little bit of everything. You have to be able to move your feet on the perimeter. Do you like the direction the game of basketball has headed in?
I do. I think it's the natural evolution of the game. It changes. The pendulum will swing back. As soon as Shaquille O'Neal has some kids that are, eligible, and we'll go back to a dominant center. So
Yeah.
the pendulum comes and goes. And we may tweak the 3-point line, if they feel like it's too much of the game. But I will say to you, as a student of the game, you should be interested in those that came before because there have been dominant big men just like Luka before, just like Jokic before, guys like Wilt Chamberlain, guys
Yeah.
like George Mikan. These guys changed the game during their eras. And this is just the latest part of the game, the iteration of the game, to see a guy like Dirk Nowitzki come over and be a 7-footer that can shoot like he can from the outside. And now you've got the international influence. 25% of the workforce in the NBA is international. And that's not by coincidence. The game has expanded so. We as Americans have done a lot to foster that growth. Coaching clinics, the appeal of the NBA, Michael Jordan, and you go right on down the line, has made this game so popular that everybody wants to play. And it's a game where you can play. You just need a ball and a hoop. You don't need equipment. Soccer is sort of like that. You just need a ball and a hoop, and you can work on your game. You don't need equipment or a big field or all that to play on. You just need your driveway and a backboard and a hoop, and off you go.
That's such a good point because there's two things that I've noticed about sports. UFC, I've said, is always going to be popular because whenever there's a fight in school, everyone stops what they're doing and they're going to go watch the fight. People gravitate towards that. And with basketball, you don't need anyone else other than a ball and a hoop. You don't need a bunch of guys. You can work on this craft by yourself. You can put up shots at night when no one's around. And that's why I think you're always going to get the best talent because it doesn't require too much. It's not expensive. You don't need a bunch of guys. So that's really interesting you said that. Now, before we focus specifically on the Atlanta Hawks and Trey Young, one thing I said on one of my recent podcasts, the NBA feels like so if the NBA was a book, right? So you have the Wilt Chamberlains, the Jerry Wests, and then you go into Larry Bird and Magic Johnson reviving the NBA, goes to Michael Jordan making it global. Then you get the Kobe's, the Tim Duncans, then LeBron's crazy reign. Now it starts to feel like this postseason in particular feels very entertaining. Like just more than normal. And I think it's because we're entering a new chapter, right? These players are writing their pages. Like back when LeBron was kind of at his peak in his reign of 9 straight NBA finals, If he won one, that's amazing. But if he lost it, it's not make or break. He's first, second, third best player of all time. His legacy was somewhat established. But with these young players, they're writing their legacy. So everything matters to them. Giannis trying to crack that all-time status, win back-to-backs. Jason Tatum trying to show he can be a number one. Anthony Edwards' first postseason. Trey Young, Luka Doncic. So it just feels a little bit more intriguing because this new wave that we have all writing their early pages. Does it feel that way to you?
It does. I think what has made it so intriguing is that it's been competitive. Other than I'm just thinking of the other sports. It's pretty unpredictable. If we sat here and said, "Who do you think is going to be in the Super Bowl next year?" Now, you might name a few teams, but you really don't know.
Right.
If you said who is going to win the World Series this year, not really sure. Who's going to win the Stanley Cup? I don't know. Could, Tampa Bay maybe could repeat, but maybe Florida's going to get them. So my point is that in the other major sports in this country, you don't quite know how it's going to turn out. Where in years past in the NBA, you kind of know who's going to make it and be there.
Right.
You knew that LeBron was going to have his run, and Kobe and the Celtics and the Lakers. I mean, there was at one point, Boston and Los Angeles had over half the championships ever contested in NBA history. So you've always had the dominant team that prevails over all.
Right.
Cleveland and Golden State go to the finals 4 straight years. I think it finally turned people off. It's like, I've seen this movie before. Now, here comes Dallas, totally unexpected. Here comes Boston, the resurgent Celtics. Here comes Golden State. They got the band back together. But you really don't know how this is all going to play out. Miami, blown out in 4 playoff games last year. Now they're back in the Eastern Conference Finals. So there's a bit of intrigue this year that we normally don't get. And I think that is what has made this playoff run so special. And I think, like as you mentioned, the fans have embraced this. They are loving it. They don't know how it's going to turn out, and they're thrilled to watch because, NBA is a very parochial sport. You root for your team. Like the Hawks. If you're an Atlanta fan, you root for Atlanta. We're bummed we got knocked out. We really don't have a lot of interest.
Right.
But the NBA fan is very interested in how this all turns out because the games have been so amazing.
Right. That's a very good point. That's a really good point. And it's been these games they're 7-game series. That's the best phrase in sports is game 7. Like people love 7-game series. Now let's focus specifically on the Atlanta Hawks, Trey Young. I absolutely love Trey Young. I've interviewed him. And what's really interesting too, we're about the same age. And so I kind of put myself in his shoes. Obviously I'm not the player of Trey Young, but just requiring that type of leadership. And as Rashad Phillips, my good friend and mentor would say, magnetism. People gravitate towards him. People like playing with him. And he just embraces that role. He's not scared to be the villain in the Garden in MSG. It's just really impressive because if you threw millions and millions of dollars at me and all the pressure in the world, tons of criticism, I'm sure it would really affect me. You can't really prepare for that. But the way that he's been able to lead the Atlanta Hawks has been one of the most impressive things I've seen. And the way he deals with pressure and the way he deals with expectations. Did you know right away Trey Young was going to be your guy? Like a lot of people have talent. Not everybody has those intangibles and those qualities to be a leader. And Trey Young has shown that right away. Did you know right away, oh, this guy has it?
Well, he always had the personality. He always had the it factor in that regard. He looks like, because people, as you mentioned, people can gravitate toward him because he looks like the kid that comes over on Saturday morning and mows your lawn. He doesn't look like the NBA player, the big, bulking 6'5", 6'6", So he's had that. The question we all had was, how is he going to do when the playoffs roll around? When teams have 2 weeks to zero in on him and defend him, will he be able to succeed? Last year, pretty magical run. We were better than New York, and he torched them. Philly, not every game he had was great, but he had enough of them Okay.
Right.
And we get through. He torches Milwaukee game one, 48 points. But I want to make a distinction. The game, the way it's officiated this year as opposed to last year is different. And you're seeing that play out. It's much more physical. It's
Right.
much more, uh, you got to be tougher. You got to play through more contact. Had we experienced this year's whistle last year, I'm not sure we have the run we have because Philadelphia probably would have just taken him out physically. But
Right.
they couldn't. He spent the whole series at the foul line. Now, fast forward to this year. Question I mentioned, how is Trey going to handle the playoffs when they're coming at him? Now, you get a much more liberal whistle, and Miami is the kind of team, as you saw, against Philadelphia, and I think you'll see against Boston. It's a take no prisoners. They are going to guard you for 48 minutes for 94 feet. And the emphasis of the officiating plays into their hands. So this is a very long-winded answer to your question. Did we see this coming? Yes and no. Yes, we saw it coming because of his greatness and his ability to create. But we weren't really sure how he's going to handle it. Now we have seen both. We see the good and the bad. Now, what changes is Trey going to make in his game? What changes will we make as a team to the next time somebody tries to bully him and get away with it? How are we going to respond? How are we going to handle that? And I think that's the next level for Trey and the Hawks to overcome. They can't run it back next year like this year. They have to be different. They have to be better. They have to be tougher. They have to be more physical. All of those things. How you change it? Well, that's why they pay our general manager millions of dollars, because that's what he's got to figure out. Do you make trades? Do you try to sign free agents? How do you retool this roster so a Miami in 2023 does not happen again?
Now, I've said this now, not to compare Trey Young to, like, making this comparison. I don't mean to say, oh, he's the next LeBron, he's the Michael Jordan. But what I will say is every great, every amazing player, you can look back in history, and there's usually a series, there's a moment that defined them. Like you said, it's a make or break. How do they respond to this? For obviously Michael Jordan, it was the bad boy Pistons, and he had to come back and get stronger. LeBron James, that Dallas Mavericks series, really mentally, not physically did he get beat up, but mentally he had to overcome that hurdle. I feel like this Miami Heat series is going to be that series for Trey Young. And I believe he'll grow so much from that series. He'll be able to pinpoint that was the moment that Trey Young realized and took that next step. Would you agree with that?
Oh, that's the challenge. There's no question. But I also must say that he's got to get some help. We've got to get a bona fide second scorer to take the pressure off him, that he can throw it to somebody, and that person is going to make a shot under duress. The only time in the Miami series that it got away from the Heat, that happened. Bogdanovich got hot in the fourth quarter of game 3. They had to shift their defense to cover him, and that gave Trey the opportunity to drive, get in the paint, do his thing.
Right.
That's the only segment of that series where things got away from Miami, and it cost him the game. So Trey's got to have help. He can't really impose his will like a LeBron, like a Jimmy Butler, like a Luka. He's not that player. He is a passer, a distributor, a distant scorer, a guy that can turn the corner and read that pick and roll. Those are the things that he's got to be better at. Not turn the ball over, be tougher with the basketball. All those things he can control. But
Right.
as much as he wants to get in the gym and work hard and all that, he's got to have some help too.
I 100% agree. And he is an amazing passer. We always see the highlights of him scoring and the shooting, but his passing, the way he's able to read the defense is second to none in the league. It's incredibly impressive. Now, the East is getting tougher. Obviously, the defending champs, the Milwaukee Bucks, I believe they're going to be very aggressive this offseason. You have a very short window of the best player in the world, in my opinion, in Giannis right now. Got to capitalize on that. The Boston Celtics, we've seen them improve. The Brooklyn Nets, I'm sure they're not going to bounce. They're going to bounce back. Obviously, the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. You have Philly if James Harden gets healthy. So the East seems to be more really just spread out than ever in a very long time. There's just contenders all across the board. You have LaMelo Ball and the Hornets. So is there anyone that comes to mind? Is there anyone in particular that you would think about when you talk about being aggressive in the offseason for the Atlanta Hawks? Because clearly, like you said, he does need some help. It can't all just fall back on Trey Young. You guys have a very good young nucleus and a lot of great pieces. Is there anyone in particular that stands out, or is it just being what the market is for certain
Yeah,
players?
that's the key. This is not a big free agent bonanza summer. Most of these guys
Right.
over the last 2 summers have gotten their long-term deals, so the free agent market is not that great. I think if the Hawks do make moves, it's going to be in the trade market. Um, the question becomes, who can you get and at what price? I have no idea.
Right, right,
I mean, you could put a wish list together, and that's fine, but whether these teams will make those particular players available, you know, that it takes two to tango when you make trades. Um, but here's the thing about the Hawks. You've got Trey, and you've got a fairly young nucleus that's still growing and still maturing. Uh, they've gotten their first rest really in 2 years that they can kind of sit back, take a deep breath, and evaluate kind of where they are. Okay. Trey's unique. There are very, very few guards of his size that are asked to carry. He did something this year that's only been done once in the history of the NBA, and that's lead in total points and assists in the
yeah,
same season. Tom Ball did it back in the 70s. And the question becomes, how do you best build around Trey? Do you ring the court with shooters? Do you get defensive-minded players because he is limited defensively? How best do you put this together? And I think that's the big challenge right now for the Hawks. Free agents, trades, draft, all are key. But I think the overall question that has to be asked is a philosophical one. Is like, how best do we build a team around Trey?
right,
And the owner even admitted last week that he thought maybe we overestimated how good we were based on the run that we made. Maybe we weren't as good as that. Might be some truth to that. We didn't have DeAndre Hunter the last 2 series. Trey gets,
right.
so I mean, it's kind of hard to say. But I think that's kind of where we are. We got to sit down, ask some tough questions about how do we best build this thing. And if these pieces are the building blocks, then how do we change it up and get better than we were?
Right. My last question for you, when it pertains to the Atlanta Hawks, would be two markets that I don't understand why aren't bigger free agent destinations are you guys and the Dallas Mavericks. Because the Dallas Mavericks, no state tax. Mark Cuban's an amazing NBA owner. You have a young star in Luka. Maybe that changes. But even then, you had Dirk. For you guys, Atlanta is the center of a lot of things in this world when it comes to news and fashion and music. It's a young city. You now have a really big young superstar in Trey Young. I was always curious on why Atlanta hasn't been a bigger free agent destination in the past. Do you think that's something that changes going forward?
I do, and I think it will change. And I think Trey would be that magnet to get free agents here, to get people thinking about maybe a trade to Atlanta. It is a great place to live. There's no question. Um, it, I think a lot of times you talk about free agency and what's a good free agent destination, and you kind of rank cities. Free agents aren't going to New York. I mean,
Mm,
it's the communications capital of the world,
yeah,
financial capital of the world. They ain't going to Madison Square Garden, right?
no,
Uh, Chicago, capital of the Midwest, the legacy of the Bulls. They ain't going to Chicago.
mm-mm.
The Lakers, to some extent, LeBron goes, but LeBron wanted to get in the movie business,
Yeah,
media business. If it had been Sheboygan, he'd have gone to Sheboygan, but it's L.A. where they make the movies. So he ends up going to the Lakers, but free agents don't really flood. I think that they would. So I think a lot of it is playing with your buddies, which is sort of 20 years of AAU mindset come to the NBA. I think a lot of it is opportunity to be the man. Sometimes you won't go if you're got to share the stage with
Right.
someone. I just think there's a whole lot of different dynamics going on other than the city where you live.
Right.
These
Right.
guys make so much money; they can live wherever they want around the globe. So it's just not the driver that it perhaps was. Phoenix. I mean, you just go on down the line. I mean, Miami has not been a destination. Pat, to his credit, kept Miami competitive till they could get the guys, the Lowrys and the Butlers, to make another run at this. But I don't think anybody would line up and say, well, Kyle Lowry is the best free agent point guard available, and Jimmy Butler is not a transcendent player, but he
Right.
fits their program. And that's
Right.
what you got to do. You got to get free agents that fit.
Well, that's a great point. It's been an absolute honor to have you on. I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, so I saved my hardest question for you for the last.
Okay.
You've covered so many games. You do such an amazing job. I've been listening to you for such a long time, and you truly have impacted my life. You've inspired me to chase broadcasting as well. And out of all the games you've covered, out of all your sports moments, is there one moment that stands out to you as like that was the best day in the office? That was my favorite game I've ever been a part of.
Max, I get that question a lot. And it's not so much that it was the one game, but it was the moment. And several, and for different reasons. Different stages of my career meant different things. They are moments that might not mean much to anybody else. But the most magical season was our 60-win campaign 5 years ago. And it wasn't, we beat Golden State at home and it was a great game. And we had the number one rated show in the Atlanta TV market that night. Not number one sports, number one overall.
Oh.
So the whole town was buzzing about the Hawks. And to me, that's what made that so special. We won 17 in a row, unheard of. But it wasn't, one game. It was just the whole streak. But I'd say that was a pretty magical moment for the city of Atlanta and for the Hawks franchise. And, as good as it was last year, it kind of snuck up on us. We didn't have people in the stands until March, and then just a handful, and we didn't open it up until the playoffs. So what we did last year was just sort of, okay, let's keep winning. But we never really felt it because we didn't have the city and the fans with us until, the playoffs. And it was unbelievable. It was otherworldly. But I would have to say the 60-win season for what it meant to the town and what it meant to the franchise.
Now, that was Kyle Korver, Paul Millsap, Al Horford, Jeff Teague, right?
Yep.
And if I'm mistaken, I think you had like three All-Stars that year?
Four.
So Kyle Korver was an All-Star that year.
His only All-Star appearance.
Wow. That's the best regular season teams we've seen.
And the NBA, when we went unbeaten in the month of January, and, they give out the Player of the Month. And the league decided to give the entire Hawks starting unit Player of the Month for January.
Wow.
And I thought, and I even sent Adam a note, and I said, first of all, David would never have done that in a million years. I said, but the message that the league is sending to basketball players around the world is the team is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's really the essence of basketball. It takes individual talent, of course. Nobody's going to win without a superstar.
Right.
But you got to be a team. You got to have all five guys together. Mike Krzyzewski often talks about the fist and how important that is. If I want to hit you and I've got my hand wide open, I might be able to poke you in the eye, but I can't do a lot of damage. But if I've got all five guys together, it's a fist, and I come at you, now I can do some damage. And that's
Right.
really what basketball is all about. Having five guys work as one. Then you got something. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That is. Bob Rathbun, the announcer of the Atlanta Hawks. It was an absolute pleasure. I really do appreciate you coming on my show and shedding light on not only your position in the NBA, but just the Atlanta Hawks and the knowledge that you have. Like I said, I listen to so much of your work, and hopefully one day I do. I love the Atlanta area, and it's something I've been kind of flirting with for a while. And working with the Atlanta Hawks would be a dream come true for mine as well. And if there's anyone that wants to listen to you or follow you, I know you have a pretty active Twitter account as well. Is there anywhere that they can find you, reach out to you, and send you any messages?
I'm on everything. Bob Rathbun TV for Instagram and Twitter, but you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and Facebook and find me. But thank you, Max. I am thrilled to be with you. It's so humbling to hear those kind words. If I made an impact, I appreciate that. And hopefully you'll be in Atlanta one day. That would be terrific.
That's the plan. That is absolutely the plan. At least cover some games. I think I can do that. It's just I have to see if my reach can get me to Atlanta. I know, obviously, the Atlanta Hawks are a young, fun team that everyone's trying to cover. So if I can get in there, I'll certainly send
Come on. You're welcome anytime.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. And we'll talk soon.
Okay.